Hello, everyone. I'm happy there is an opportunity to present on the Real Options Conference this time online. And it's my pleasure to share with you our work, who is Professor Julian Scott Yeomans from Canada, my good colleague and friend, on assessing optionality and interactions in corporate strategic decisions with simulation decomposition. So let's start. How do we discover optionality in the first place? Well, here is my thoughts about that. First, we start with structuring the problem, right? Understanding what are the revenues, the costs, how the project gonna go. And then we put those assumptions and those interactions into a model. And having the model, we can discover vulnerabilities. What kind of factors are critical? What kind of bottlenecks we're having there? And finally, if we are lucky, we can find solutions to address those vulnerabilities. And that would require, of course, redesigning the project and recalculating the model and perhaps finding new vulnerabilities and so on. The cycle can go several times. Now, how do we discover vulnerabilities? Of course, there is a common sense, first of all, right? For example, in renewable energy projects, we know that electricity production is intermittent and it's often a problem. Then consulting with experts could be another way to understand what kind of problems project might have. But ultimately, all those things go inside the model, and inside the model, we can understand its behavior and vulnerabilities by sensitivity analysis. What kind of strategies and tools do we have there? Often there is a one-at-a-time analysis conducted. Here's a picture presented from my work with Steineric and Verena. Practically, you check one factor and how it influences the outcome while all the other factors are fixed. And I know that many of us are doing this kind of analysis, right? Well, there are some limitations. It's good for relatively simple and straightforward models, but as long as the model is complex, then this one-at-a-time factor analysis fails to capture the interactions, all the possible weirdness, weird patterns in model behavior. Not good. Then, of course, there are all at a time analysis techniques. One of them is quite simplistic scenario analysis. Now we are working a lot with companies, and it's quite often what they are doing in the corporate world, simply checking 3 scenarios, which is a custom. So they're defined historically, and the same for different projects, varying 2-3 variables, key variables inside those scenarios. And that's how things are done. And of course, here the big question mark is, okay, what if you're missing some important scenario? What if you're not checking volatility in some factors that actually can change? What if there are so many what ifs, right? And then the contribution of individual factors is lost there as well. Then there is a possibility to run Monte Carlo simulation, so the probability distribution would result from there. And then all the factors are changing at the same time simultaneously, but this can be combined with scenario analysis, as we can see on the picture, and several probability distributions can be even displayed on the same graph. We have seen it even on this conference. Louis was showing something like that as well, right? And still, I would argue that there is a limitation to that as well. And if the model is indeed complex, and if one really wants to get insight into model behavior, then both all of those techniques should be run in multiple iterations with long playing with the model, and only then some feel for the model will be created. Well, while playing with the case like that, we accidentally invented a new approach that I would argue a nice systematic technique to discover the the key inside of a model behavior, and we called it simulation decomposition. One can refer to it as a new generation sensitivity analysis technique. Now, what does it do? Philosophically, it combines all three mentioned techniques, one at a time sensitivity analysis, so there is a contribution of individual factors, Monte Carlo simulation, so there is a full picture, and scenario analysis. So there are different pathways displayed. There are not necessarily arbitrary, but meaningful for the case at hand. And by combining those techniques, SimDec is able to reveal synergies, vulnerabilities, and it ultimately provides actionable information. Technically, what it does, it maps multivariable scenarios onto the probability distribution of the outcome. Let's dip into it a bit more. So assume we have a model and we have certain variables in there, and there is some uncertainty related to it. And here we have x ranging uniformly from 0 to 1, and z that is binary variable and takes either 0 or 1 numbers. Then what do? We break down those into states. Continuous variable can be broken down into several states, so with some particular boundaries, numeric boundaries. Binary variables, categorical variables can be simply assumed to have each state to each category. Then what do? We construct all the combinations of those by forming groups or scenario compositions. This way, for the x being low, we check both true and false for the z, and then the same way for all the other states, and thus we have all the combinations of those states and a group index attached to each of them. And then what we do when running Monte Carlo simulation and varying all those inputs, we record not only outputs but also input values. And every time we map every single output to the corresponding group. This way, for example, here in the first simulation run, the output was 45, the x was 15, which belongs to the low state, the z was 1, which belongs to the first state, true, and low, true, that's the group number 1. And similar way we are doing for all the other simulation runs, whether it's 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. And then with that information, what we are able to do, we are able to take the resulting probability distribution and decompose it by the groups. And again, each group represents the multivariable scenario combination, right? So we see the both individual contributions, we see the big picture, and we're also able to assess the influence and the interactions of variables onto the outcome. So for the convenience, we have automated steps from 2 to 4 in an Excel model that is freely available by the link. And now, within the Research to Business project, we are also automating the choosing which variables to use for decomposition. And with that addition, the SimDec becomes truly powerful tool to instantly understand behavior of any model, because it analyzes, it takes into account the most influential factors. It shows how they interact, if they do, and how they influence the outcome in the big picture. Let me demonstrate you that power with some examples. So let's take investment profitability first. Assuming an investment into a wind farm and having 3 strategies to go either to the market with uncertain electricity prices, or entering a bilateral contract with fixed price with a big electricity consumer, or choosing a state subsidy with some water flows inside. Now, on the right, there is a result of a Monte Carlo simulation, probability distributions of net present value for each strategy chosen. And if we look at them, well, they're all quite awful. There's huge amount of risks attached. And the least awful case is number 2, bilateral contract. And still, one would think if to go for this option because, well, half of the outcomes are in the negative zone, losing money. Not good. Now we decompose the distributions by the 2 factors that we are able to influence: the production level, electricity production level, and the investment cost level. And what can we see from here? We can see from here first that in the market, no matter which scenario we choose, we can end up in the negative zone, in the positive zone. We do not really have any lever to steer our investment anyhow. In the bilateral contract case, there is actually already something interesting going on. We can see that some scenarios are moved, the yellow scenarios are moved towards the positive range comparing to the violet scenarios. So high production might be interesting, not a surprise, right? But then in the case of subsidy, we can see that all scenarios that are attributable to high production, they're all entirely in the positive range. And this is happening regardless of the level of investment cost and regardless of the all market uncertainties that are also presented there on the background in those distributions. So that would mean a totally different story. There is actually a chance to do a successful investment with the beautifully guaranteed profitability, as long as a good site for the wind farm can be provided, can be found. Another case refers to life cycle emissions assessment, and we were looking into simple transportation pallets, and taking into account the emissions produced from different stages of life of those transportation pallets. We would understand how much CO2 emissions they produce, and taking into account variations of parameters of materials and stuff provided in a single country, in Finland, we constructed a possible distribution of the emissions. And again, this picture doesn't say us much, except that there is some clearly binary behavior, perhaps, right, with 2 peaks and quite high deviation anyway. So let's check with the decomposition, and what we take for it. We take end of life, either burning or landfilling, and it clearly already explains us the binary pattern here. And we also take number of uses. How much do we use those pallets? And if we focus now on the landfilling option, and if we go from low to high number of uses, so we are increasing the number of uses, and the emissions go down, which is reasonable, right? We are becoming more efficient. We are using less pallets over the same period of time, and our emissions cumulatively go down. Excellent. Then if we are focusing on the burning part instead, then the reverse is true. The more we use the pellet, the more emissions we produce. That doesn't make any sense until we understand that actually with burning the pellets, there is negative emissions produced because there's assumed to be a substitution of fossil fuels, and the faster you burn the pellet, the more you'll be able to burn in the same period of time, the more negative emissions you'll produce. So this is quite an insight for a company who attempts to be environmentally responsible and wants to show some nice numbers in their reports. but also there is something to think for policymakers as well, right? So let me jump into conclusions. We were looking at the SimDec as a new generation sensitivity analysis technique. It proved to be quite powerful on the investment case where we actually changed the decision by applying SimDec, and in LCA case where we found a better strategy. And all the materials about SimDec can be found on dedicated website, carefully constructed for you. But then I also wanted to invite you for some actions. So first of all, you're very welcome to try SimDec by yourself. Again, over via the link, the model is available, and there is an open access article that you can read for more details. Plus, I'll be happy to collaborate and try to apply SimDec to your models and see what's going on. And if there is anything interesting, you are actually warmly invited to contribute to our book planned for 2023, where we will explore some more applications of SimDec. Thank you.